She was a CEO worth millions. He was a single father who fixed computers for a living. When someone at one of Seattle's most exclusive events asked them the one question nobody dared to say out loud, the entire room went silent. What happened next didn't just shock every person at that table. It changed two lives that were never supposed to collide. If you want to hear how this story began, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I can see just how far this story travels. The call came in at 7:43 on a Tuesday morning, and Ryan Bennett almost didn't answer it. He was standing in the kitchen of his apartment on Rainier Avenue, pouring milk into a bowl of cereal that his 6-year-old daughter had already declared she didn't want. Sophie sat at the table with her arms crossed, her dark hair still tangled from sleep, a look on her face that said she had already made up her mind about how this morning was going to go. "I don't like that kind," she said. "You liked it yesterday." "Yesterday was different." Ryan set the milk carton down and rubbed his eyes. He'd been up since 5, answering emails from 2 different clients, both of whom seemed to believe their computer problems were emergencies on the level of a building fire. His phone buzzed on the counter, and he glanced at the screen. Unknown number, Seattle area code. He picked it up. "Ryan Bennett, Independent IT," he said, balancing the phone between his ear and shoulder while he opened the fridge to find something else Sophie might eat. The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, and clearly stressed. A woman. Not the person who needed help, but someone who worked for the person who needed help. An executive assistant, maybe. She explained the situation quickly. A server failure at a technology company downtown, something involving corrupted backup files, and a system that had locked out every user on the network. Their regular IT contractor was unavailable. Someone had recommended Ryan. Could he come immediately? "How immediate are we talking?" Ryan asked. "An hour ago," the woman said. He looked at Sophie, who was now drawing something on the back of a grocery receipt with a crayon she'd found under the table. He looked at the clock. School drop-off was at 8:50. The job was downtown, which meant at least 30 minutes in traffic if he was lucky, and luck had not been a regular visitor in Ryan Bennett's life for some time now. "I can be there by 9, he said. "That works. I'll send you the address." He hung up and crouched down next to Sophie. "Hey, Bug, we gotta move fast this morning, okay? Daddy's got a job." Sophie didn't look up from her drawing. "Can I bring my backpack with the stars on it?" "You can bring whatever backpack you want, but you gotta eat something first." "I'm not hungry." "Then bring a banana for later. Come on, shoes on." They were out the door in 12 minutes, which Ryan considered a personal best. He drove Sophie to Maple Leaf Elementary in his 10-year-old Honda Civic, the one with the check engine light that had been on so long he'd stopped noticing it. He walked her to the entrance, kissed the top of her head, and watched her disappear through the double doors with her star backpack bouncing against her small frame. For a moment, he just stood there on the sidewalk. A couple of other parents passed him, moving in pairs, talking easily about weekend plans and soccer practice schedules. Ryan didn't know any of them well enough to say more than hello. He wasn't unfriendly. He just didn't have time. Between the freelance IT work and raising Sophie alone, his social life had narrowed to the width of a phone screen. He got back in the car and headed downtown. The address the assistant had texted him led to a glass and steel building on 2nd Avenue, the kind of place that had a lobby with a waterfall feature and a security desk staffed by people who looked like they could bench press a filing cabinet. Ryan showed his ID, signed a visitor log, and was escorted to the 14th floor by a woman in a blazer who walked like every second cost money. He was led through an open-plan office that buzzed with tension. People were standing at their desks, talking in low, urgent voices. Monitors displayed error messages. Someone had written, "Do not reboot," on a sticky note and taped it to a server rack in the corner. The air smelled like burnt coffee and stress. The assistant who'd called him, her name was Dana, he learned, met him at the door of a glass-walled office at the far end of the floor. "She's in there," Dana said, nodding toward the office. "Olivia Hart. She's the CEO. She'll want to talk to you before you start." Ryan blinked. "The CEO wants to talk to the IT guy?" Dana gave him a look that suggested this was not a question worth asking. "She wants to understand the problem. She's like that." Ryan adjusted the strap of his tool bag on his shoulder and walked in. Olivia Hart was standing behind her desk, not sitting. She had her phone pressed to her ear and was speaking in a tone that was controlled but carried an edge, the kind of voice that didn't raise itself because it didn't need to. She was younger than he'd expected, early 30s maybe, with sharp features and dark eyes that moved quickly. She wore a fitted charcoal blazer over a white blouse, and her hair was pulled back in a way that looked effortless, but probably wasn't. She held up one finger to Ryan, "Give me a second," and finished her call. "No, I understand the concern, but we're not making that announcement until the system is back online. I don't care what the timeline was. The timeline just changed." She paused. "Because I said so, Martin. That's why." She hung up and dropped the phone onto her desk like it had offended her. Then she looked at Ryan. "You're the IT person," she said. Not a question. "Ryan Bennett." "Yeah." "Olivia Hart." She didn't extend her hand. Not out of rudeness, he realized, but because she'd already moved on mentally. She stepped around her desk and gestured toward the server room. "The whole network crashed at 6 this morning. Our backup system didn't kick in the way it was supposed to. 14 departments are locked out. We have a product demo scheduled for Thursday, and the contractor we usually work with is apparently on vacation in Portugal." "Portugal's nice," Ryan said, and immediately wished he hadn't. But something flickered across Olivia's face. Not quite a smile, but close. "I'm sure it is. Can you fix this?" "I need to look at it first, but probably, yeah." "Probably?" "I don't make promises before I've seen the problem, but I'm good at what I do." She studied him for a moment. There was something measuring in her gaze, but it wasn't cold. It was the look of someone who'd learned to evaluate people quickly because she'd been burned by the ones she'd trusted too slowly. "Okay," she said. "Dana will show you the server room. Whatever you need, ask for it." Ryan spent the next 4 hours buried in cable trays and diagnostic screens. The problem was worse than he'd expected, a cascading failure that had started with a firmware update gone wrong and spiraled into corrupted sector allocations across 3 of their primary storage drives. It was the kind of mess that would have taken a corporate IT team a full day to untangle. Ryan did it in 4 hours and 20 minutes, partly because he was skilled, and partly because he'd seen this exact failure pattern before in a smaller company last year and knew the shortcut. By noon, the system was back online. Departments started logging in. The product demo files were recovered. Someone in the office actually clapped, which made Ryan uncomfortable. Dana brought him a cup of coffee he hadn't asked for and told him Olivia wanted to see him again before he left. He found her in the same glass office, but this time she was sitting. Her blazer was draped over the back of her chair, and she looked tired in a way that she probably didn't let most people see. "It's fixed," Ryan said. "I heard. In 4 hours. 4.5, technically. Our last contractor took 2 days to fix something half as complicated." She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms, but the posture wasn't defensive. It was something else. Curiosity, maybe. "Where did you learn to do that?" "Self-taught, mostly. Started messing with computers when I was 15. Dropped out of a community college program because I was already working faster than the curriculum. Been freelancing for about 8 years now." "No degree?" "No degree." "And you've been doing this independently the whole time?" "I had a regular job for a while. Small company in Bellevue. But after my wife passed, I needed flexibility. Freelancing let me set my own hours around my daughter's schedule." He hadn't planned to say that. He didn't usually mention Jenna to clients. But something about the quiet of Olivia's office, the way she was actually listening instead of just waiting for him to finish, it came out before he could stop it. Olivia's expression shifted. Not pity. He'd seen pity 1,000 times and had learned to recognize it the way you recognize a bad smell. This was something different. Recognition, maybe. The look of someone who understood that life sometimes handed you a version of yourself you hadn't planned on becoming. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it. He could tell because she didn't add anything else. "Thanks," he said. "It was 3 years ago. We're doing okay. Sophie, that's my daughter. She's 6. She's the reason I get up in the morning. Well, her and the fact that people keep breaking their computers." That got a real smile from Olivia. Small, but real. It changed her face completely. I'll make sure you're paid by end of day, she said. And I'd like to keep your number on file if that's okay. Our current contractor is apparently more interested in beaches than servers. Sure. And tell Martin, whoever Martin is, you can make that announcement now. The system's solid. Martin is my COO, and I'll be sure to pass that along. Ryan left the building with a check in his pocket and a strange feeling he couldn't name. He wasn't used to being noticed, really noticed, by someone like Olivia Hart. In his world, he showed up, fixed the problem, and left. People were grateful the way they were grateful for plumbers. Glad you existed, but not particularly interested in who you were. Olivia had been interested. He shook it off. She was a CEO running a company with hundreds of employees. He was a guy with a tool bag and a Honda Civic. Whatever he'd felt in that office was probably just the relief of finishing a hard job. He picked up Sophie from school at 3:15 and took her to the park near their apartment. She ran to the swings like she always did, and he sat on the bench, watching her pump her legs higher and higher, her hair streaming behind her. "Daddy, push me," she called. "You're doing great on your own, Bug. But I want to go higher." He got up and pushed her. She squealed with delight, and for a few minutes the world was simple. Just a father and his daughter and the Seattle sky, gray as always, pressing down like a soft ceiling above them. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Ryan sat on the couch with his laptop and went through his emails. 2 new job requests, both small. A follow-up from a client he'd helped last month wanting to know if he could set up a home network. Routine stuff. The kind of work that paid the bills but didn't excite him. He thought about Olivia's office, the view from the 14th floor, the way people moved around her with a kind of focused energy, like she was the center of gravity in that building. He thought about the way she'd asked him where he'd learned his skills, not with condescension, but with genuine curiosity. Like his answer actually mattered. He closed the laptop and went to bed. 3 days later, on a Friday afternoon, Ryan was standing in line at Inkwell Books, a small bookstore cafe in Capitol Hill that he'd been coming to since before Sophie was born. It was one of the few places in the city that still felt like it belonged to regular people. Mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu, the smell of old paper and fresh coffee. Sophie was at a play date, and Ryan had 2 hours to himself, which happened roughly once every lunar eclipse. He was holding a copy of a spy novel he'd been meaning to read for months when he heard a voice behind him. "That's a good one. The ending's terrible, though." He turned around, and there was Olivia Hart. She looked different outside of the office, softer somehow. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair down around her shoulders. No blazer, no phone pressed to her ear, no clipped instructions to subordinates named Martin. She had a book tucked under her arm, something with a plain cover that he couldn't read the title of. And she was holding a coffee cup with both hands, the way people do when they're cold or just want something to hold on to. "Olivia," he said, and then felt stupid for stating the obvious. "Ryan." She smiled, and it was the same real smile he'd seen in her office. "The IT savior. What are you doing here?" "Buying a book and pretending I'll have time to read it. You?" "Same, honestly, except I know I won't have time and I'm buying it anyway." They stood in an awkward silence for a moment, the kind that happens when two people who've shared exactly one meaningful interaction run into each other in a completely different context and don't know which version of themselves to be. "Do you want to sit down?" Ryan asked, nodding toward one of the small tables by the window. She hesitated. It was brief, but he noticed it. The calculation. Should she? Could she? What did it mean? He recognized it because he'd done the same calculation in his head before asking. "Sure," she said. They sat across from each other at a table barely big enough for their 2 coffee cups. Outside, the rain had started. The fine, persistent Seattle drizzle that wasn't dramatic enough to complain about, but was relentless enough to seep into your mood if you let it. "So," Olivia said, wrapping her hands around her cup, "how's the independent IT business?" "Thriving, by which I mean I have enough work to keep the lights on and not enough to hire help." "That sounds exhausting." "It is, but it's mine, you know. I set my own schedule. I pick Sophie up from school every day. That matters more to me than scaling up." Olivia nodded slowly, and he could see something working behind her eyes. "I envy that, actually." "You envy my barely scraping by lifestyle?" "I envy the clarity. You know exactly why you do what you do. It's for Sophie. That's a clean motivation. She paused. Running a company, you lose that clarity pretty fast. It starts out being about the product, the idea, the thing you want to build. Then it becomes about growth targets and investor expectations and quarterly projections. And somewhere along the way, you forget why you started. Why did you start? She took a sip of her coffee. I was 24. I'd been working at a tech firm downtown, and I kept seeing these problems that nobody was solving because solving them wasn't profitable enough in the short term. Accessibility tech, mostly. Software that helps people with disabilities interact with standard platforms. I thought I could do it better on my own. She set the cup down. Turns out, I could. But better at scale looks different than better in a garage. You started in a garage? My parents' garage in Tacoma. Very cliche, I know. Steve Jobs started in a garage. Yeah, well, Steve Jobs didn't have to explain to his mother why there were server racks next to the lawnmower. Ryan laughed. A real laugh. The kind that came from somewhere in his chest and surprised him. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed like that with someone who wasn't Sophie. Olivia seemed surprised by it too. She looked at him differently for a moment, like she was seeing something she hadn't expected. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. When you were in my office, when you mentioned your wife, you said it so matter-of-factly, like it was just another thing that happened. Does it still hurt, or have you gotten used to it? The question should have felt intrusive. From anyone else, it probably would have. But Olivia asked it the way she asked everything, directly, without pretense, like she genuinely wanted to understand. Ryan turned his coffee cup in his hands. Both, he said. It hurts, and I'm used to it. Those two things can exist at the same time. People don't tell you that. They act like grief is a road with a destination, like eventually you arrive at healed and you park the car and get out. But it's not like that. It's more like the road just becomes part of where you live. The pain's still there, but you've built a house around it. Olivia was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Ryan started to wonder if he'd said too much. That might be the most honest thing anyone said to me in a year, she said finally. People aren't honest with you? People are careful with me. There's a difference. When you're the person signing the checks, everyone calibrates what they say. They tell you what they think you want to hear, or what they think will keep you calm, or what they think will make them look good. Nobody just talks to me. I'm talking to you. Yeah, she said softly. You are. They sat there for another 40 minutes, and the conversation drifted into easier territory. Books they'd read, places they'd been, the particular frustrations of Seattle traffic. Olivia told him about a board meeting where she'd accidentally referred to a major investor by his competitor's name. Ryan told her about the time Sophie had called his most important client, the computer doctor man, to his face. When they finally stood up to leave, the rain had stopped, and the late afternoon light was slanting through the bookstore windows in a way that made everything look warmer than it was. This was nice, Olivia said, and the way she said it, a little surprised, like she'd forgotten what nice felt like, stuck with Ryan long after they'd said goodbye. He drove home thinking about her, not in a romantic way exactly, more in the way you think about someone who showed you a window you didn't know was there. For 3 years, his world had been Sophie and work and the apartment on Rainier Avenue. He'd gotten comfortable in the smallness of it. Not happy exactly, but comfortable. The kind of comfortable that comes from not expecting anything, which is different from peace. Olivia had cracked that open, just slightly, just enough to let in a draft. Over the next 2 weeks, they texted. It started with Ryan sending her an article about a firmware vulnerability that might affect her company's systems. A professional courtesy, nothing more. She responded with a thank you and a question about whether he'd finished the spy novel. He told her the ending was, as promised, terrible. She sent a laughing emoji and recommended something else. He recommended something back. The texts got longer. The responses got faster. Topics shifted from books and tech to personal things. Sophie's latest obsession with drawing animals. Olivia's frustration with a board member who kept pushing her toward decisions she didn't believe in. The particular loneliness of eating dinner alone in a house that was too big for one person. One Thursday, Olivia texted him. Sophie likes animals, right? There's a wildlife exhibit at the Pacific Science Center this Saturday. Would she want to go? Ryan stared at the text for a long time. He knew what it meant. He also knew what it didn't mean, and he was careful not to confuse the two. Olivia might just be being friendly. She might be reaching out the way people do when they're lonely and have found someone who doesn't make them feel like they have to perform. Or it might be something else. He showed the text to Sophie, who reacted as if she'd been offered a trip to the moon. "Can we go, Daddy? Please? Please, please, please?" "Let me think about it. You always say that when you mean yes." She wasn't wrong. He texted Olivia back. "Sophie says yes, and I say yes, too." Saturday arrived with rare Seattle sunshine, the kind that made the whole city look different, like someone had turned up the contrast on a photograph. Ryan dressed Sophie in her favorite overalls and the sneakers with the light-up soles, and they drove to the Pacific Science Center, where Olivia was already waiting by the entrance. She looked nervous. Ryan noticed it immediately. The way she kept adjusting her jacket, the slight uncertainty in her smile. Olivia Hart, the woman who could stare down a boardroom full of investors without flinching, was nervous about meeting a 6-year-old. "Hi," she said to Ryan, and then crouched down to Sophie's level. "And you must be Sophie. Your dad tells me you like animals." Sophie studied Olivia with the intense, unfiltered scrutiny that only children are capable of. "Do you like animals?" she asked. "I do. My favorite is the octopus." Sophie's eyes widened. "Octopuses have 3 hearts." "They do. Do you know why?" "No? Why?" "Honestly, I don't know either, but I think it's because they need extra love to keep all those arms working." Sophie giggled. It was a sound Ryan hadn't heard directed at a stranger in a long time. His daughter was friendly enough, but she was also cautious, the way kids become when they've learned early that the people in their life don't always stay. But with Olivia, the caution melted fast. By the time they reached the marine exhibit, Sophie was holding Olivia's hand and explaining every fact she knew about sea turtles, which was an impressive number for someone who hadn't yet learned to tie her own shoes. Ryan walked a half step behind them, watching. There was a tightness in his chest that he recognized but hadn't felt in years. It was the feeling of wanting something and being afraid of wanting it at the same time. They spent 3 hours at the Science Center. Sophie pressed her face against every piece of glass, asked questions that none of the adults could fully answer, and insisted on going through the dinosaur exhibit twice because she'd missed the Triceratops the first time. At one point, while Sophie was distracted by an interactive volcano display, Olivia turned to Ryan. "She's incredible," she said. "She has her moments. You should see her when she doesn't want to eat her cereal." "Selective eater?" "Selective everything. She's 6 going on 45. Olivia laughed. "I was like that. My parents used to say I came out of the womb with a business plan." "I believe that." They stood side by side, watching Sophie slam her palm against a button that made a model volcano light up orange. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that only happens when 2 people are comfortable enough not to fill it. "Ryan," Olivia said quietly, "I want to be honest with you about something." He looked at her. The nervousness was back, but different now, deeper. "I don't do this," she said. "Whatever this is. I don't meet people at bookstores and text them about books and spend Saturdays at science centers. My life doesn't have room for it. My schedule is planned in 15-minute increments by a woman named Dana who would have a breakdown if she knew I was here instead of reviewing quarterly reports. So why are you here?" She looked at Sophie, then back at him. "Because, for the first time in a very long time, I wanted to be somewhere more than I wanted to be productive. And that scares me." Ryan nodded slowly. "It scares me too." "Then why did you say yes?" "Because Sophie said please 3 times, and I can't say no to that." Olivia gave him a look. "And because I wanted to see you," he added, quieter. She didn't say anything to that. She just turned back to watch Sophie, but he could see the corner of her mouth lift slightly, and he could see her shoulders relax in a way they hadn't been relaxed all morning. After the Science Center, they went to a diner a few blocks away, the kind of place with red vinyl booths and a menu laminated enough to survive a flood. Sophie ordered pancakes, despite it being 2 in the afternoon, and sat on her knees on the booth seat so she could see over the table. "Olivia," Sophie said, with the directness of someone who hadn't yet learned social filters, "do you have a family?" Olivia paused with her coffee cup halfway to her mouth. I have my parents. They live in Tacoma, and a brother in Portland. But I don't have my own family. No, just me. Don't you get lonely? Ryan opened his mouth to redirect, but Olivia shook her head slightly. It's okay. Sometimes, Olivia said, but I keep pretty busy. Daddy gets lonely too, Sophie said matter-of-factly. He doesn't say so, but I can tell because he watches old movies by himself after I go to bed. Ryan felt his face get hot. Sophie, it's true. I heard you watching that movie with the boat last week. Thank you for that report, Bug. Olivia was trying very hard not to laugh. She caught Ryan's eye and mouthed the words, the boat, with raised eyebrows. Titanic, he admitted. I was watching Titanic. At midnight? It was 11, and I fell asleep before the end. That's honestly the saddest thing I've ever heard, Olivia said. And then she did laugh, and Ryan laughed too. And Sophie looked between them with the satisfied expression of someone who had successfully created chaos and was proud of it. The afternoon stretched longer than any of them had planned. They talked about everything and nothing. Sophie's school, Olivia's company, the coffee shop on Pike Street that Ryan swore had the best espresso in the city, the fact that Olivia had never seen the Fremont Troll up close despite living in Seattle for 8 years. That's criminal, Ryan said. Sophie and I will take you. It's a requirement. A requirement. For living in this city, yes. There's a whole list. The Troll. Pike Place Market at 6 in the morning when the fish guys are setting up. The view from Cary Park at sunset. I've been to Pike Place. At 6 in the morning? I've been to Pike Place at a reasonable hour. Then you haven't really been. Olivia looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that he was starting to recognize. It was the same thing he felt. The strange, frightening pull of someone who made you want to be more than the version of yourself you'd settled for. When they finally said goodbye outside the diner, Sophie hugged Olivia without being asked to. It was sudden and fierce, the way children hug when they haven't learned to hold back yet. Olivia froze for just a second, and then she hugged Sophie back, and Ryan watched something shift in her face, a softness that had nothing to do with business plans or quarterly reports, a need that she probably hadn't admitted to herself. Bye, Olivia, Sophie called as Ryan buckled her into the car seat. Come to our house next time. I'll show you my drawings. I'd love that, Olivia said. Ryan closed Sophie's door and turned to Olivia. They stood on the sidewalk, neither of them quite ready to leave. Thank you, he said. For today. She doesn't warm up to people easily. Neither do I, apparently. Could have fooled me. Olivia shook her head. Trust me, this is not normal for me. I have a reputation for being cold, Ryan. People at my company think I don't know how to relax. My brother once bought me a book called How to Be Human as a joke, and the worst part is I actually read it. And? It was useless, but the chapter on active listening was okay. He smiled, she smiled, and then they stood there for another 5 seconds of silence, and it was the kind of silence that says more than words do. I'll text you, he said. Please do. He drove home with Sophie already asleep in the back seat, her head tilted against the car window at an angle that couldn't possibly be comfortable. The sun was going down behind the Olympics, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Ryan felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Not the big dramatic kind, not the kind that sweeps in like a wave and changes everything at once. The small kind. The quiet kind. The kind that shows up when you're not looking for it and sits down beside you without asking permission. He carried Sophie inside, put her to bed, and stood in the doorway of her room, watching her sleep. I think we might be in trouble, Bug, he whispered. Sophie didn't stir. Her arm was wrapped around a stuffed elephant named Gerald, and her face was perfectly peaceful. Ryan went to the kitchen and did the dishes. He wiped down the counters, he put away the cereal that Sophie still hadn't eaten, and then he sat on the couch and stared at his phone, wondering if it was too soon to text Olivia and knowing that it was, and typing the message anyway. Sophie fell asleep in the car. Pretty sure you wore her out. Thank you for today. It meant a lot. The response came faster than he expected. It meant a lot to me too, more than you know. He read the message twice, 3 times, and then he set the phone down and leaned his head back against the couch and stared at the ceiling of his small apartment, listening to the rain start up again outside, feeling the walls of his careful, protected life begin to shift. It terrified him. But for the first time in a very long time, Ryan Bennett was not just surviving. He was starting to want something more. The texts didn't stop after that Saturday. If anything, they accelerated. Morning messages about coffee, late-night exchanges about nothing important that somehow felt important anyway. Ryan would find himself reaching for his phone between jobs, checking for her name on the screen with a frequency that made him feel like a teenager, which was both ridiculous and undeniable. 2 weeks after the Science Center, Olivia called him instead of texting. It was 9:30 on a Wednesday night. Sophie was asleep. Ryan was sitting on the couch with a bowl of reheated pasta, watching a documentary about bridges that he'd chosen specifically because it required zero emotional investment. "Hey," he said, pausing the TV. "Hey, am I interrupting anything?" "Just a very exciting documentary about suspension cables." "Wow, your nightlife is even worse than mine." "I don't have a nightlife. I have a 6-year-old and a Netflix queue." She laughed and then went quiet for a moment. He could hear something in the background, not silence, but the particular emptiness of a large space with only one person in it. "I had a bad day," she said. Ryan set down his pasta. Olivia didn't call to talk about bad days. She barely acknowledged that bad days existed. In the time he'd known her, she'd mentioned frustrations and annoyances, but never once had she used the word bad about her own experience. "What happened?" "Board meeting, 4 hours. There's a faction, 3 members, who've been pushing me to pivot the company away from accessibility tech and toward commercial enterprise solutions. More profitable, they say. Better margins. And they're not wrong about the numbers. Enterprise clients pay more, they're stickier, and the growth trajectory is cleaner. But accessibility is why I started this company. It's the whole reason we exist. If we pivot, we become just another enterprise software company. There are hundreds of those. There's nothing special about being one more." "What did you tell them?" "I told them I'd consider it, which is what you say when you don't want to fight but you're not ready to surrender." "Sounds like you know what you want to do." "I know what I want to do. I don't know if I can afford to do it. The company's growing, but not fast enough for the investors. They want returns. That's their job. And if I push back too hard, they'll start looking for someone who won't." "Someone to replace you?" "As CEO, yeah. It happens. Founders get pushed out all the time when the board decides the company's outgrown them. It's not even personal. It's just math." Ryan was quiet for a moment. He didn't know anything about boards or investors or corporate governance. His world was circuit boards and Ethernet cables and making sure Sophie had clean socks for school. But he knew what it felt like to have something you'd built threatened by forces you couldn't control. "Can I say something that might sound stupid?" he asked. "Please?" "When Jenna got sick, when things started getting really bad, every doctor we talked to had an opinion about what we should do. Treatment plans, experimental programs, clinical trials, they all had numbers to back up their recommendations, success rates, survival percentages. And every single one of them was technically right about their numbers. But none of them knew Jenna. None of them knew what she actually wanted. What did she want? She wanted to be home. She wanted to be with Sophie. She wanted to stop being a patient and just be a person for whatever time she had left. And when we finally made that decision to stop chasing the numbers and just live, everyone told us we were making a mistake. The doctors, our families, even some of our friends. They all thought we were giving up. Were you? No. We were choosing. There's a difference." The line was quiet for a long time. When Olivia spoke again, her voice was thicker than before. "Ryan, I'm sorry. I called you to complain about a board meeting, and you just... Don't do that. Don't rank pain. A board meeting that threatens everything you've built is a real problem. You don't have to compare it to anything else." She exhaled slowly. "How are you this decent?" "I'm not decent. I'm just tired enough to be honest." "Well, your honesty is inconvenient. I was fully committed to feeling sorry for myself tonight." "You still can. I'm just saying your gut is probably right. About the company." "My gut is expensive. My gut might cost me everything." "Yeah, but at least it's yours." When they hung up, Ryan sat in the dark living room and thought about what he'd said. He hadn't talked about Jenna's last months to anyone outside of his grief support group, which he'd attended for exactly 4 sessions before deciding that talking about his feelings in a circle of folding chairs was not his preferred method of processing loss. But he'd told Olivia, just like he'd told her in her office that first day. Something about her made the words come out in the right order, without the armor he usually wrapped around them. It was dangerous, and he knew it. He went to the kitchen and washed his pasta bowl. The following Saturday, Olivia made good on the rain check. She came to their apartment on Rainier Avenue, and Ryan had spent the entire morning trying to make the place look less like a single father's apartment and more like a home where an actual adult lived. He scrubbed the bathroom. He hid the pile of unfolded laundry in his closet. He even bought a plant, a small fern from the hardware store, and set it on the kitchen counter where it looked vaguely out of place, like a guest who'd wandered into the wrong party. Sophie had been counting down the hours since breakfast. Is she here yet? Not yet. Now? Sophie, she said noon. It's 10:15. That's basically noon. When Olivia finally arrived, she brought a gift for Sophie. A set of colored pencils, the professional kind with 72 colors and a carrying case. Sophie stared at them like they were made of gold. These are real artist pencils, Sophie whispered, holding the case with both hands. They are. I figured if you're going to show me your drawings, you should have proper tools. Sophie immediately dragged Olivia to her room, which was small and cluttered with books and stuffed animals and taped up artwork covering nearly every inch of wall space. Ryan followed, leaning in the doorway, watching his daughter pull drawings from a folder and explain each one with the intensity of someone presenting a doctoral thesis. This is a cat, but it's a magic cat. See the wings? And this is our apartment, but I made it bigger because I wanted more rooms. And this is Daddy fixing a computer. See, that's the computer, and that's Daddy looking frustrated. Olivia studied each drawing seriously, asking questions, pointing out details. She didn't do the thing that most adults did, the quick glance, the, oh, how nice. She actually looked. She treated Sophie's art the way she probably treated financial reports, with full attention and genuine engagement. Ryan watched them from the doorway, and the tightness in his chest was back. For lunch, he made grilled cheese sandwiches, the only thing he could cook that he was fully confident wouldn't be terrible. They ate at the small kitchen table, Sophie between them, chattering about her teacher, Mrs. Nakamura, who apparently had a pet turtle that lived in the classroom and was named President. President? Olivia said. President the turtle. He's very slow. Mrs. Nakamura says he's dignified. He sounds dignified. He pooped on the reading rug last week. Even dignified creatures have bad days. Sophie laughed so hard she almost knocked over her juice. After lunch, Sophie retreated to her room to christen the new colored pencils, and Ryan and Olivia sat on the couch with coffee. The apartment was quiet except for the occasional sound of Sophie humming to herself, a tuneless, wandering melody that Ryan had heard 1,000 times and never got tired of. Your apartment is nice, Olivia said, looking around. You don't have to lie. I'm not lying. It's small, but it feels like people actually live here. My place is 4 times this size and feels like a hotel lobby. Sounds like a nice hotel lobby, though. It's got great lighting and zero personality. I hired a decorator when I moved in because I didn't have time to furnish it myself, and she gave me this very curated, very expensive space that looks incredible and feels absolutely nothing like me. What does feel like you? Olivia thought about it. Honestly, this. Mismatched mugs, drawings on the wall, a weird fern on the counter that you clearly bought this morning. Ryan looked at the fern. Was it that obvious? It still has the price tag on it. He groaned, and she laughed, and it was the easiest moment they'd shared yet. Ryan, she said, and her voice shifted into something more serious. I need to tell you something, and I want to be straightforward about it. He set his coffee down. Okay. There's an event next month, the Kessler-Whitfield wedding. Marcus Kessler is a tech investor, saw old money, big connections. His daughter is marrying the COO of a logistics company, and the wedding is going to be packed with executives, board members, the kind of people who show up in Forbes profiles. I'm invited, and I need to go because Marcus sits on 2 boards that intersect with my company's interests, and not showing up would be noticed. Sounds like a fun time. It sounds like torture, but that's not the point. She paused. I want you to come with me. Ryan stared at her. The sentence sat between them like an object on the table, visible and undeniable. Olivia, I know. You're asking me to go to a wedding full of tech billionaires. I'm asking you to go to a wedding with me. The billionaires are just a side effect. I don't own a suit. I'll buy you a suit. You're not buying me a suit. Then rent one, borrow one. Wear a nice shirt and dark jeans, I don't care. I'm not asking you to impress anyone, Ryan. I'm asking you to be there. He stood up and walked to the kitchen, not because he needed anything, but because he needed to move. He opened a cabinet, closed it, and turned back to her. Do you understand what happens when we walk into that room together? He said. People are going to look at us and do the math. Successful CEO, guy who fixes computers. They're going to have opinions. People always have opinions. About you. They're going to have opinions about you. And I don't want to be the reason your professional reputation takes a hit. Olivia stood up from the couch. That's not your decision to make. What? My reputation is my business. I've spent 6 years building it, and I'll spend the rest of my life maintaining it, and not once in that process do I need someone else's permission about who I bring to a wedding. Her voice had that edge again, the CEO edge, but underneath it was something raw. Vulnerability dressed up as strength. I'm not trying to control you, Ryan said quietly. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection. I need a partner at one single event for one single evening, and I want it to be you. She crossed her arms. Unless you don't want to go, in which case, just say that. Of course I want to go. Then stop looking for reasons not to. They stared at each other across his small kitchen, and the distance between them felt like both a wall and a bridge. One condition, Ryan said. What? I'm buying my own suit. Fine. And it might be from a department store. I wouldn't expect anything less. The tension broke. Not entirely. There was still something unresolved humming between them, something that neither was ready to name. But the sharp edge softened, and when Olivia sat back down on the couch, she sat a little closer to where he'd been. In the weeks that followed, the wedding became both a deadline and a catalyst. Ryan found a suit at a Nordstrom rack in Bellevue. Charcoal gray, decent fit, 30% off. He tried it on in the dressing room and stared at himself in the mirror, which was something he generally avoided. He looked like what he was, a 32-year-old man who worked with his hands and slept too little and had forgotten what it felt like to dress for something other than utility. He bought the suit anyway. Meanwhile, his relationship with Olivia continued to deepen in ways that felt both inevitable and terrifying. She started coming to the apartment on Sundays. Not every Sunday, but enough that Sophie began expecting it. They'd go to the park or the library, or just stay in while Sophie, Drew, and Ryan and Olivia talked at the kitchen table about things that mattered and things that didn't. Olivia told him about her parents, her father, a retired electrician, and her mother, a woman who had worked as a school secretary for 30 years and still called Olivia twice a week to make sure she was eating properly. She thinks running a company means I forget to eat, Olivia said. Do you? Sometimes, but that's not the point. Ryan told her about his childhood in Spokane, the small apartment he'd shared with his mother after his father left when Ryan was 9. His mother had worked 2 jobs, day shift at a laundromat, nights at a grocery store, and Ryan had essentially raised himself from middle school on. That's why you're so good at fixing things, Olivia said. You've been solving problems on your own since you were a kid. I prefer to think of it as being stubborn. Same thing sometimes. They talked about Jenna too, though less frequently. Ryan would mention her in passing, a recipe she used to make, a phrase Sophie had picked up from her, and Olivia would listen without flinching. She never tried to fill Jenna's space or pretend it didn't exist. She seemed to understand instinctively that loving someone new didn't require erasing someone old. One evening, while Sophie was at a sleepover, her first one, which Ryan had agreed to only after calling the other parent 3 times and confirming the existence of working smoke detectors, Olivia came over for dinner. He cooked spaghetti, which was the second thing in his culinary repertoire after grilled cheese, and they ate at the kitchen table with a bottle of wine that Olivia had brought. Can I ask you something personal? She said. You always do. Have you dated anyone since Jenna? Ryan twirled his fork in the pasta. Once, about a year and a half ago, a woman I met through a client. We went on 3 dates. What happened? Nothing happened. That was the problem. She was perfectly nice, and I felt absolutely nothing, like eating food with no flavor. Every conversation was fine, and I dreaded every one of them. That sounds worse than a bad date. It was. A bad date at least gives you a story. 3 mediocre dates just makes you wonder if you're broken. You're not broken. I know that now. He said it simply, without emphasis, but the weight of it settled between them. Olivia set her fork down and looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen before. Open, unguarded, scared. Ryan, what are we doing? What do you mean? I mean this. Us, the texts, the visits, the science center, the drawings, dinner at your kitchen table on a Thursday night. What is this? He leaned back in his chair. I think you know what it is. I want to hear you say it. Why? Because I need to know I'm not imagining it. Because I've spent 6 years being the person who makes decisions and gives directions and stays in control, and right now I have no control at all, and that's terrifying, and I need to hear you say it. Ryan looked at her across the table. The kitchen light was harsh and slightly yellow, and there was a stain on the tablecloth from Sophie's juice, and the faucet had a slow drip he kept meaning to fix. It was not a romantic setting. It was not a scene from a movie. It was just his kitchen, his life, and a woman sitting across from him asking for the truth. I have feelings for you, Olivia. Real ones. The kind that scare me. The kind I didn't think I'd feel again. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were bright. Okay, she said softly. Okay. Okay. Because I have them too, and I'm absolutely terrified. Good. Then we're both terrified. At least we're not alone in it. She laughed, a shaky, relieved laugh, the kind that comes out when you've been holding your breath without realizing it. He reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were cold. She held on tight. They sat like that for a long time, not talking, just holding on. The faucet dripped. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car horn honked. It was not a grand romantic gesture. There were no fireworks, no swelling music, no dramatic declaration under the stars. It was 2 people at a kitchen table with spaghetti and cheap wine, admitting that they wanted each other and being honest about how much that cost. Later, after Olivia had gone home and Ryan was cleaning up, he found himself standing at the kitchen sink, scrubbing a pot and thinking about what he'd said. Real feelings, the kind that scare me. He'd meant every word, and that was exactly the problem. Because Ryan Bennett knew from experience what it meant to love someone completely. He knew the height of it and the depth of it, and the particular devastation of having it taken away. He knew what it felt like to sit in a hospital room at 3 a.m, holding a hand that was growing colder, making promises he couldn't keep. He knew that love was not safe. It had never been safe. And choosing it again with full knowledge of what it could cost was either the bravest or the most foolish thing he'd ever done. He finished the dishes. He checked the door locks. He looked in on Sophie's empty room and felt the specific ache of a parent whose child is sleeping under someone else's roof for the first time. Then he picked up his phone and texted Olivia. I'm glad you asked me to say it. The reply came 30 seconds later. I'm glad you did. The night of the Kessler-Whitfield wedding arrived on a Friday in mid-October, and Ryan stood in front of his bathroom mirror, wrestling with a tie he hadn't worn since Jenna's funeral. The suit fit better than he'd expected. His shoes were shined. He'd even gotten a haircut, which Sophie had supervised via video call from his mother-in-law's house, where she was staying for the night. You look handsome, Daddy, Sophie had said, tilting her head critically, but your hair is still kind of messy. That's the style, Bug. It looks like you forgot to brush it. Thank you for your honest feedback. Now standing alone in his apartment, he adjusted his tie for the 4th time and tried to steady the drumming in his chest. He wasn't nervous about the suit or the venue or the people. He was nervous about what tonight meant. Walking into that room with Olivia wasn't just attending a wedding. It was a declaration. It was public. It was real in a way that kitchen table confessions and Sunday park visits weren't. A car pulled up outside. A black sedan, not a limousine, because Olivia had specifically said she didn't want to arrive in anything that made them look like they were trying too hard. He grabbed his wallet and his keys and walked out the door. Olivia was in the back seat. She was wearing a dark green dress that he'd never seen before, and her hair was down, and she looked at him as he slid in beside her with an expression that was equal parts warmth and panic. "You look nice," she said. "You look incredible." "I look like I spent 2 hours getting ready, which is accurate and embarrassing." 2 hours well spent. She smiled, but he could see the tension in her jaw. The CEO mask was halfway on, the composed, public-facing version of herself that she wore like armor. But underneath it, the Olivia he knew was pacing. "Hey," he said, taking her hand. "We don't have to stay long." "I know. And if anyone's rude, we leave." "No one's going to be rude. They're going to be polite and curious and slightly condescending, which is worse. Then we'll be polite and curious and slightly condescending right back." She squeezed his hand. "Just don't let go of me." "I won't." The sedan pulled up to the venue, a converted waterfront estate on Mercer Island with views of Lake Washington and enough valets to staff a small hospital. Ryan stepped out first and extended his hand to Olivia, and together they walked through the entrance into a world that was emphatically not his. The first thing Ryan noticed was the sound, not music, that came later, but the particular hum of wealth in conversation. It was different from regular talking, quieter, more deliberate, every sentence weighted with awareness of who might be listening. The second thing he noticed was how people looked at him. Not rudely, not directly, but with the sideways attention of a crowd that had already cataloged everyone worth knowing and was now trying to place the one person who didn't fit. Olivia's hand tightened around his as they crossed the threshold into the main reception hall. The space was enormous. Exposed timber beams, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, long tables set with flowers and crystal that caught the candlelight and scattered it across the ceiling like stars trapped indoors. A string quartet played something classical in the corner, and waiters moved between clusters of guests carrying trays of champagne in glasses so thin they looked like they might shatter from the music alone. "Okay," Ryan murmured. "This is fancier than I expected." "What were you expecting?" "I don't know. Folding chairs, a DJ, one of those chocolate fountains." "There might be a chocolate fountain. Rich people love chocolate fountains. They just hide them better." A waiter appeared beside them with a tray, and Ryan took a glass of champagne because it seemed like the thing to do. He took a sip and immediately regretted it. The bubbles hit the back of his throat wrong, and he had to suppress a cough. "Easy," Olivia said, fighting a smile. "I'm fine. It's just aggressive champagne. It's Dom Perignon." "It's trying too hard." She laughed, short and genuine, and a few heads turned in their direction. Ryan could see the calculations happening in real time. People registering Olivia's face, recognizing it, then moving their eyes to him and finding nothing to register. He wasn't in their database. He was an unknown variable at an event where everyone was accounted for. They made their way through the room. Olivia greeted people with practiced ease. A handshake here, a smile there, a few words about quarterly results or market conditions that meant nothing to Ryan but clearly meant everything to the people she was speaking to. She introduced him simply. "This is Ryan. Not my boyfriend, not my date, not the man I've been seeing. Just his name, offered without explanation, as if his presence beside her was self-evident and required no justification. Some people accepted it smoothly. Others paused, their eyes doing that subtle flicker between Olivia's face and Ryan's, measuring the gap. A woman in a silver dress, whose name Ryan immediately forgot, leaned in during one such introduction and said, with a smile that was 90% performance, "And what do you do, Ryan?" "I'm an independent IT technician." The pause that followed lasted exactly 2 seconds. It was not a long pause, but in a room where everyone's answer to that question involved C-suite titles and 7-figure revenues, 2 seconds was a canyon. "How interesting," the woman said, in a tone that meant the opposite. Olivia's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Ryan saw it because he'd learned to read her by now, the micro-expressions she used when she was angry, but choosing not to show it. "Ryan's the person who saved my entire network when it crashed before the Meridian product launch," Olivia said, her voice light but with steel underneath. If he hadn't shown up, we would have missed a demo that secured a $12 million contract. So I'd say his work is fairly interesting. The woman's smile thinned. Of course, I didn't mean... I know what you meant. It's fine. Olivia turned to Ryan. Come on. I want to find our table. As they walked away, Ryan leaned toward her. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. She was just making conversation. She was being dismissive. There's a difference, and I don't tolerate it. Ryan didn't argue, partly because she was right, and partly because there was something in the way she defended him, without hesitation, without embarrassment, that made him feel a thing he wasn't sure he'd earned, like she'd already decided he was worth fighting for, even in small ways, even when the stakes were only social. They found their table near the center of the room. It was a round table for 10, already half filled with couples who looked like they'd been vacuum sealed into their formal wear. Ryan pulled out Olivia's chair before sitting down, and a man across the table raised his glass in their direction. Olivia Hart, been a while. James, good to see you. James Chen was broad-shouldered and affable, with the easy confidence of someone who'd been wealthy long enough that he'd stopped thinking about it. He was a venture capitalist. Olivia had mentioned him on the drive over as one of the few investors she actually respected. And who's this? James asked, turning to Ryan with genuine curiosity rather than the performative kind. Ryan Bennett, Ryan said, shaking his hand. Ryan fixed a catastrophic server failure at my company in under 5 hours, Olivia offered. So you're the reason she didn't lose her mind last month. Thank you for your service. James grinned and turned to the woman beside him. This is my wife, Patricia. Patricia was tall and quiet, with an intelligent face and a handshake that was firmer than James's. It's nice to meet someone from outside the usual circle, she said to Ryan, and she meant it. He could tell. The table filled up over the next 20 minutes. Introductions were made, wine was poured, and conversation settled into the rhythms of people who knew each other primarily through transactions. Ryan listened more than he talked, which was his natural mode. He caught fragments. A merger that someone was excited about, a real estate deal that had gone sideways, a debate about whether a particular startup was overvalued or merely ambitious. He was out of his depth, and he knew it, but he wasn't drowning. He was floating, letting the current carry him, paying attention, learning the rules of a world he'd never asked to enter. Dinner was served in courses. The salad was composed of ingredients Ryan couldn't identify. The main course was a cut of beef so tender it practically dissolved, with a sauce that tasted like someone had reduced a bottle of expensive wine into a tablespoon of liquid. Ryan ate carefully, watching which fork Olivia used and mirroring her. You're doing great, she whispered at one point, leaning toward him. I just used the wrong knife for the bread. Nobody noticed. The waiter noticed. He gave me a look. That's his job. He gives everyone a look. By the time dessert arrived, some kind of layered pastry that was more architecture than food, the conversation at the table had loosened. The wine was doing its work. People were talking over each other, laughing, dropping the professional veneer for something closer to actual personality. That was when it happened. A man at the far end of the table, Victor Crane, someone had said during introductions, a senior executive at a consulting firm with offices in 6 countries, set down his wine glass and turned his attention to Ryan and Olivia. He'd been watching them all evening, Ryan realized. Not with hostility, exactly, but with the focused interest of someone who liked to understand things and had decided that Ryan and Olivia were a thing that needed understanding. I have to say, Victor began, loud enough for the table to hear, you two are the most unexpected couple here tonight. The table quieted slightly. Not a dramatic silence, more like the volume being turned down from 7 to 4. Enough that Victor's words hung in the air. Unexpected how? Olivia asked. Her tone was neutral, but Ryan could feel her stiffen beside him. Oh, come on, Olivia. You know what I mean. A tech CEO and an IT technician. It's like a movie premise. He smiled, the kind of smile that thinks it's charming. How old are you two, anyway? The table went fully quiet. It wasn't just the question. It was the way he asked it, casually, publicly, wrapped in enough social lubrication to make it seem friendly, but with an undercurrent that everyone at the table recognized. He wasn't asking their ages. He was asking the real question, the one that had been circling the room all night like a predator looking for an opening. What is she doing with him? Ryan felt Olivia freeze. Her hand, which had been resting on the table near his, pulled back an inch. He glanced at her and saw something he hadn't seen before. Not anger, not defensiveness, but a flash of raw vulnerability. The fear that she'd spent the whole evening holding at bay was now standing in front of her, wearing an expensive suit and a condescending smile. The table was watching them. James Chen's jaw had tightened. Patricia was looking at Victor with barely concealed contempt. The other guests had the careful blankness of people who didn't want to take sides but were very interested in the outcome. Ryan felt the moment stretch. He could let it pass. He could laugh it off, deflect with a joke, give Victor the non-answer that would let everyone pretend the question hadn't been what it was. That was the safe move, the easy move. He didn't take it. "I'm 32, Ryan said. His voice was calm, steady, not loud, but clear enough that every person at the table heard him. "Olivia's 30, and since you seem to be asking something that goes beyond arithmetic, I'll answer that too." Victor's smile flickered. "I'm a single father," Ryan continued. "My wife died 3 years ago. Since then, I've been raising my daughter alone, working freelance IT jobs to keep the lights on, and trying to figure out how to be both a mother and a father to a 6-year-old who still asks me why her mom isn't coming home." He paused. Not for effect, because the words were heavier than he'd expected, and he needed to breathe. "I didn't plan on meeting anyone. I wasn't looking for it. I walked into Olivia's office to fix a server crash, and she was the first person in 3 years who didn't look at me like I was something broken that needed sympathy." The table was silent. Not the uncomfortable silence of people who wanted to escape, but the held-breath silence of people who were listening. "She saw me," Ryan said. "Not my circumstances, not my bank account, not whether I fit into a room like this. She saw who I actually am, and more than that, she let me see who she actually is, behind the company and the title, and everything that everyone in this room thinks they know about her. And the person she is, the real person, is someone I am grateful for every single day." He picked up his glass, not because he wanted a drink, but because he needed something to do with his hands. "So, to answer your question, Victor, yeah, we're unexpected. A lot of the best things in life are." He took a sip of wine, set the glass down. The silence held for 3 more seconds. Then James Chen raised his glass from across the table. "To the unexpected," he said. Patricia raised hers. 2 others followed. Then the rest of the table, one by one, glasses lifting into the candlelight, and the silence broke into something warmer. Not applause, nothing that dramatic, but a shift in the air, a recalibration. Victor Crane picked up his glass last. He gave a small nod, not an apology exactly, but an acknowledgement that he'd underestimated the situation and knew it. Under the table, Olivia's hand found Ryan's. She held on so tight her fingers trembled. "Excuse me," she said to the table, her voice perfectly controlled. "I need some air." She stood, and Ryan stood with her. They walked out of the reception hall together, through a side door, onto a stone terrace overlooking the lake. The night air was cold and smelled like pine and water, and the music from inside was muffled to a distant pulse. Olivia walked to the railing and gripped it with both hands. She didn't turn around. "Olivia, give me a second." He gave her a second, then another. He stood a few feet behind her, watching the tension in her shoulders, the way she was breathing. Deliberate, measured, the breathing of someone trying very hard not to fall apart. When she turned around, her eyes were wet. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "What?" "Say all of that, in front of all those people." "Because it was true." "That's not a reason. You could have deflected. You could have made a joke and moved on. Nobody would have blamed you." "I would have blamed me." She shook her head. "You don't understand. Those people in there, they're going to talk about this. By Monday, every board member, every investor, every person in my professional orbit is going to know that I'm dating a freelance IT technician who stood up at the Kessler wedding and gave a speech about grief and love." "Good." "It's not good, Ryan. It's complicated. Everything worth having is complicated. Stop being reasonable. I'm trying to be scared." "You're already scared. You've been scared all night, and you came anyway. You brought me anyway." That's not weakness, Olivia. That's courage. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a rough, impatient gesture, the kind of woman who didn't like crying in front of anyone. I keep waiting for the part where this gets easy. It doesn't get easy. It gets worth it. She looked at him for a long time. The moonlight off the lake caught the side of her face, and he could see every line of worry, every trace of exhaustion, every crack in the armor she'd built over 6 years of being the woman in charge. She was not a movie version of a CEO. She was a person. Tired, complicated, afraid. "When you said I saw you," she said quietly, "you meant it? Every word. Because I need you to know that you see me too. And that scares me more than any board meeting or investor call or executive who thinks he's clever. Nobody sees me, Ryan. Not the real version. They see the title, the company, the decisions. They see what I produce. But you see the person who goes home to an empty condo and eats takeout standing at the kitchen counter because sitting down at the dining table alone feels too sad. That's the person I want to be with." She closed her eyes, and a tear slid down her cheek, and she didn't wipe it away this time. "Come here," Ryan said. She stepped forward, and he put his arms around her, and she pressed her face against his shoulder. She didn't sob. She wasn't the sobbing type, but she shook, and he held on, and for a few minutes the world narrowed to the two of them on a stone terrace, the lake breathing quietly below, the distant sound of music and laughter from a party that no longer mattered. When she pulled back, she looked different. Not fixed. People didn't get fixed that easily, but lighter, like she'd set something heavy down, at least for the moment. "My mascara is probably destroyed," she said. "You look fine." "You're lying." "I'm lying. You look like a raccoon." She punched his arm, and he laughed, and she almost laughed, and then she did laugh, and they stood there on the terrace laughing like idiots, while 100 of Seattle's most influential people drank expensive wine 30 feet away. "We should go back in," Olivia said. "Do you want to?" She thought about it. Really thought about it. Not just the reflexive answer, but the honest one. "Yeah," she said. "I do. Because if we leave now, it looks like we're ashamed, and I'm not ashamed. Neither am I. Then let's go. But first," she opened her clutch, pulled out a compact mirror, and spent 60 seconds doing damage control. When she was done, she looked nearly the same as before, except for a slight redness around her eyes that could pass for allergies if nobody looked too closely. They walked back in together. The rest of the evening played out differently than the first half. Something had shifted, not just between Ryan and Olivia, but in the way the room received them. Victor's question had been a test, and Ryan's answer had passed it in a way that reshuffled the social deck. People approached them now, not with the cautious curiosity of before, but with warmth. James Chen's wife, Patricia, pulled Olivia aside and said something that made Olivia smile in a way Ryan hadn't seen before, genuine and unguarded, the smile of a woman who'd been offered solidarity instead of scrutiny. An older man named Howard, who'd made his fortune in shipping and walked with a cane he clearly didn't need, cornered Ryan at the bar and told him about his own wife, a waitress he'd married 40 years ago when his partners told him he was insane. "They said she didn't fit the profile," Howard said, swirling his scotch. "Whatever that means. As if love has a profile. She's been the best decision I ever made, better than any deal, any company, any amount of money." "Is she here tonight?" "Over there, the one in the blue dress telling that young man he has terrible posture." Ryan looked across the room and saw a small, sharp-eyed woman jabbing her finger at a hedge fund manager's chest while he nodded meekly. "I like her already," Ryan said. "Everyone does. That's the thing about marrying someone real. The right people recognize it." They danced. Ryan was a terrible dancer, stiff, off-rhythm, constantly apologizing, and Olivia was marginally better, which she attributed to 2 years of ballroom lessons her mother had forced on her in high school. "Your mother made you take ballroom lessons?" "She thought it would help me with social skills." "It did not." "Were you always this bad at socializing?" "I was worse. I once gave a presentation in college where I forgot to introduce myself. I just started talking about data architecture. 3 minutes in, the professor stopped me and asked who I was. 'What did you say?' I said, I'm the person presenting data architecture. Ryan pulled her closer, their movements awkward and imperfect. Around them, other couples glided with practiced smoothness, people who'd taken lessons for their own weddings, or who simply moved through life with a polish that came from decades of privilege. Ryan and Olivia bumped into each other, stepped on each other's feet, and kept going. We're really bad at this, Olivia said. We are. People are watching. Let them. At 11 o'clock, they left. The valet brought the sedan around, and they slid into the back seat with the particular exhaustion of people who'd survived something they'd been dreading. Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder, not dramatically, just tilted sideways, resting the weight of the evening against him. Thank you, she said. For what? For not letting Victor win. He wasn't going to win. The question was just whether I was going to be polite about it or not. You were polite. Barely. She was quiet for a moment. Ryan? Yeah? What you said at the table, about me seeing you, about you seeing me. Did you plan that? No, I just opened my mouth and it came out. That's either very brave or very reckless. It's probably both. She reached down and intertwined her fingers with his, her grip firm and certain. The sedan moved through the dark streets of Mercer Island, past houses with lights glowing behind expensive curtains, past lives that were neat and curated, and nothing like the messy, honest, terrifying thing that was taking shape between them. I want you to know something, Olivia said quietly. When Victor asked that question, I froze. Not because I was embarrassed by you, I need you to understand that. I froze because I realized that everyone in that room was about to see something I've been protecting. Not you, us. The fact that this matters to me, that you matter to me. And I've spent my whole career making sure nobody sees what matters to me, because the minute they see it, they can use it. Nobody used it tonight. Tonight, no, but the world doesn't always look like tonight. Then we'll deal with it when it doesn't. She pressed closer against his shoulder. Outside the car, the Seattle skyline rose against the dark sky, all glass and light, and the lake reflected everything back in broken fragments. Take me home? She asked. Which home? Yours. He looked at her. Sophie's at her grandmother's until tomorrow afternoon. I know. Olivia, I'm not asking for anything complicated. I just don't want to go back to my empty condo tonight. I want to sit on your terrible couch and drink bad coffee and not be alone. Can we do that? Yeah, he said. We can do that. They rode the rest of the way in silence, Olivia's head on his shoulder, Ryan's hand in hers, the car carrying them through the city toward a small apartment on Rainier Avenue, where a fern with a price tag still on it sat on the kitchen counter, where drawings covered the walls, where the life he'd built out of grief and stubbornness and love waited for them both. They didn't talk much that night at the apartment. They didn't need to. Olivia sat on the couch with her shoes off and her feet tucked under her, holding a mug of coffee that Ryan had made too strong, and she didn't complain about it. Ryan sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, and they watched the rain streak down the living room window in silence. At some point, Olivia fell asleep leaning against him, and he sat perfectly still for 40 minutes because he didn't want to wake her, and because the weight of her against his side felt like something he'd been missing without knowing it. He carried her, not dramatically, not like a movie. He just helped her stumble, half asleep, to his bed, where she curled up on top of the covers fully dressed and was unconscious again in 30 seconds. He slept on the couch, with a blanket that was too short and a pillow that smelled like Sophie's shampoo. And he woke up at 6:15 with a crick in his neck and the strange, disorienting awareness that someone else was breathing in his apartment. When Olivia emerged from the bedroom an hour later, she was wearing yesterday's clothes and yesterday's smudged mascara and an expression that was equal parts sheepish and defiant. I stole your toothbrush, she said. Which one? The blue one. That's Sophie's. Oh, she paused. I'll buy her a new one. She'll be thrilled. She's been asking for the kind with the sparkly handle. Olivia sat down at the kitchen table and accepted the coffee he'd already made, and they ate toast because that was all he had. And the morning felt ordinary in a way that surprised them both. Not electric, not loaded with significance. Just two people at a table, eating toast, not performing. I should go, Olivia said eventually. "I have a call at 10, and I look like I slept in my clothes." "You did sleep in your clothes." "I know that. I don't need the board to know that." He walked her to the door. She turned around, and for a moment they stood there in the narrow hallway of his apartment, the light coming through the kitchen window behind them, and neither of them reached for a dramatic gesture. She kissed him. Brief, warm, real. And then she left. Ryan stood in the hallway and listened to her footsteps on the stairs. Then he went back to the kitchen, sat down, and finished his toast. The weeks after the wedding were when reality set in. Not the reality of their feelings. Those had been real for a while now, spoken and unspoken. The reality of logistics. The reality of two lives that operated on entirely different frequencies trying to find a shared rhythm. Olivia's schedule was merciless. She was in the middle of a product launch for a new accessibility platform, something that would allow visually impaired users to navigate complex enterprise software through voice commands. It was the project she'd been fighting the board to protect, and now that she'd won that fight, she had to deliver. Her days started at 6:30 and ended at 9 or 10, and the margins between were filled with calls, meetings, investor updates, and the 1,000 small fires that burned constantly inside a growing company. Ryan's schedule was built entirely around Sophie. School drop-off at 8:15, pickup at 3, homework, dinner, bath, bedtime. The freelance work filled the gaps, squeezed into the hours when Sophie was at school or after she fell asleep. He was good at his job, and he had enough clients to keep the bills paid, but there was no flexibility to expand, no room to take on bigger projects, and no one to call when a client needed him at the same time Sophie needed him more. They tried to see each other. They managed dinners once or twice a week, usually at Ryan's apartment, because it was easier than navigating the optics of Olivia's world. Sophie adored these visits. She'd set out her colored pencils and draw portraits of Olivia with impossible hair and enormous eyes, and Olivia would study each one with the same intensity she brought to financial projections. But the cracks appeared early. The first real argument happened on a Wednesday night, 3 weeks after the wedding. Olivia had canceled dinner for the second time in a row. A board member had called an emergency meeting, something about a competitor filing a patent claim that overlapped with their new platform. She'd texted Ryan at 4:30, an hour before she was supposed to arrive. "I'm so sorry. Have to stay. Patent issue. Can't explain. Tomorrow?" Ryan had already cooked. Not spaghetti this time. He'd actually looked up a recipe online and made chicken parmesan, which had taken him 2 hours and resulted in one burnt pan, one splattered apron, and a dish that looked nothing like the picture but smelled decent. Sophie had helped set the table with the good plates, the ones that matched, which they only owned 4 of. "Is Olivia coming?" Sophie asked, for the 3rd time, sitting at the table with her chin in her hands. "Not tonight, Bug. She had to work late." "She always has to work late." "She doesn't always." "Last time, too, and the time before that, she came late and had to leave early." Ryan looked at his daughter, and the guilt hit him sideways. Not guilt toward Olivia. She had legitimate reasons, every time. But guilt toward Sophie, who had opened her heart to someone new and was now learning that new people could disappoint you the same way the world already had. "Sometimes adults have jobs that don't let them choose their schedule," Ryan said carefully. "It doesn't mean she doesn't want to be here." "Then why isn't she here?" He didn't have a good answer for that. They ate the chicken parmesan in relative silence, and it was too dry, and Ryan scraped the plates afterward with more force than necessary. When he called Olivia that night, after Sophie was asleep, the conversation went wrong almost immediately. "How's Sophie?" Olivia asked. Disappointed. The word landed harder than he'd intended, or maybe exactly as hard as he'd intended. "Ryan, I'm sorry. The patent claim is serious. If we don't respond by Friday..." "I know it's serious. I'm not questioning that." "Then what are you questioning?" "I made dinner. Sophie set the table. She asked me 3 times if you were coming." 3 times. And I had to tell her no while the food I spent 2 hours making sat on the stove getting cold. Silence. Then, "That's not fair." "Which part?" "The part where you make me feel guilty for doing my job. You know what my life looks like. You knew when we started this." "Yeah, I did. And you knew what mine looks like. You knew that Sophie comes first and that she doesn't handle broken promises well because she's already lost one person who was supposed to be permanent." The silence that followed was different, heavier. I didn't promise her, Olivia said quietly. I said I'd try. She's 6. She doesn't hear try. She hears yes. So what do you want me to do? Quit my job? Cancel board meetings? I'm fighting to keep this company alive, Ryan. I'm fighting to build the thing I believe in while 3 men in suits try to turn it into something I don't recognize. And I'm doing it alone. I don't have a partner at work. I don't have a co-founder. It's me. Every decision, every crisis, every late-night call, it's all me. I'm not asking you to choose between me and your company. Then what are you asking? I'm asking you to stop treating this like something you can schedule. Us, Sophie. We're not a meeting you can move to next Tuesday. That's not what I'm doing. It feels like what you're doing. She exhaled sharply. Okay, I hear you, and I'm sorry about Sophie. I'll make it up to her. Don't say that unless you mean it. I mean it. Then show up. That's all I'm asking. Show up when you say you will. They hung up without saying goodnight, which had never happened before. Ryan sat on the couch and stared at his phone and felt the specific frustration of a man who knew he was right, and also knew that being right didn't fix anything. The next morning, a delivery arrived at the apartment. A package for Sophie, no return address. Inside was a hand-painted octopus figurine, ceramic, detailed, clearly not mass-produced, and a note in Olivia's handwriting. For Sophie's collection, this one has 3 hearts just like the real ones. Tell her I'm sorry, and I'll be there Friday. I promise. Sophie clutched the octopus like it was alive. Is it from Olivia? Yeah, Bug, it's from Olivia. Is she coming Friday? She said she is. Sophie looked at the octopus, then at Ryan, with an expression that was too knowing for a 6-year-old. Okay, but if she doesn't come, I'm keeping the octopus anyway. That's fair. Olivia came on Friday. She showed up at 5:30, still in her work clothes, with dark circles under her eyes and her phone buzzing in her purse. She silenced it without looking at it and sat down on the floor next to Sophie, who was coloring at the coffee table. I'm here, Olivia said. Sophie didn't look up. You're late. I know. I'm sorry. Daddy made spaghetti this time. He said chicken was too hard. Olivia glanced at Ryan, who shrugged from the kitchen doorway. Spaghetti sounds perfect, Olivia said. Sophie was quiet for another 30 seconds, carefully filling in the wings of a butterfly with 3 different shades of purple. Then, without looking up, she pushed the box of colored pencils toward Olivia. You can color with me if you want. It was forgiveness, offered in the only language Sophie knew how to speak. Olivia picked up a pencil, the teal one, and started filling in a flower at the edge of Sophie's page. They worked in silence, side by side, and Ryan watched from the doorway with his arms crossed and his chest tight. This was the hard part, not the grand moments, the speeches at weddings, the confessions over kitchen tables. Those were difficult, but they were also clear. You knew what they asked of you. The hard part was this, the daily work of showing up, the negotiation between what you wanted and what you could give, the constant recalibration of expectations between people who loved each other but lived in different worlds. Dinner was better than last time. Spaghetti was within Ryan's competence range, and Sophie talked through the entire meal about President the Turtle, who had apparently escaped his enclosure during math class and been found in the art supply closet. Mrs. Nakamura said he was looking for creative inspiration, Sophie reported. A turtle with artistic ambitions, Olivia said. I respect that. He ate a crayon. Less respectable, but still brave. After Sophie went to bed, Ryan and Olivia sat on the couch, and the unfinished argument from Wednesday sat between them like a guest who refused to leave. I've been thinking, Olivia said, turning her coffee cup in her hands. About what you said. About scheduling. I was harsh. You were honest. There's a difference. You taught me that. She set the cup down. Here's what I realized today, sitting in a meeting about patent litigation that I genuinely do not care about. I've spent 6 years building this company, and somewhere along the way, the company started building me. I eat when it lets me eat. I sleep when it lets me sleep. I see the people I care about when it gives me permission. And I've been treating that like it's normal because everyone around me treats it like it's normal. My assistant schedules my life in 15-minute blocks, and I've never questioned that until now. I'm not asking you to blow up your career. I know, but I need to ask myself a question that I've been avoiding. She looked at him directly. What is all of this for? The company, the growth, the 14-hour days? What's the end game? Because right now I'm building something that demands everything from me and gives me back a corner office and a reputation. And until I met you, I thought that was enough. I thought if I just kept working, eventually I'd get to the part where it felt worth it. Does it feel worth it? The work does. The loneliness doesn't. And I've been pretending they're not connected, but they are. She leaned back. I missed dinner, twice. And when you called me on it, my first reaction was defensiveness, not guilt. That scared me, because it means I've gotten so used to putting the company first that I've stopped noticing when I'm putting people second. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Olivia, I need you to hear something too. Okay? I was unfair the other night. Not about the content. I stand by what I said about Sophie, but the way I said it. I put the whole weight of her disappointment on you, and that's not right. She's my daughter. Her emotions are my responsibility, not yours. And the truth is, part of the reason I was angry wasn't about Sophie at all. It was about me. I was disappointed. I wanted to see you, and instead of saying that, I hid behind my kid, and that's not fair to either of you. Olivia stared at him. Did you just take accountability in the middle of an argument? Is that weird? It's profoundly weird. Nobody does that. In business, people defend their position until they're dead or promoted. You just voluntarily admitted you were wrong. I was partially wrong. I still think you cancel too much. I do cancel too much. Okay, so we agree. We agree. They looked at each other, and the tension that had been building for days didn't evaporate. That wasn't how it worked, but it loosened, like a knot that had been pulled slightly less tight. I want to figure this out, Olivia said. I don't know how, but I want to. Me too. And I want you to know that when I cancel, it's never because you're not important. It's because I haven't figured out how to be important in two places at once. Nobody has. That's why people compromise. I'm not great at compromising. I've noticed. But I'm willing to be bad at it, if you're patient. I've been raising a 6-year-old alone for 3 years. Patience is literally all I have. She laughed, and he laughed. And it wasn't the laughter of two people who'd solved their problem. It was the laughter of two people who'd agreed to keep trying, which was different and harder and more honest. The weeks that followed were messy, not catastrophic, just imperfect. Olivia rearranged her schedule, and it didn't always hold. She made it to dinner 3 Fridays in a row, and then missed the 4th because of a crisis with a government contract. Ryan handled it better than the first time, and Olivia called Sophie directly from her office to apologize, which Sophie accepted with the pragmatic stoicism of a child who had learned that adults were unreliable but could be forgiven if they tried hard enough. They fought about small things and big things. They fought about Ryan's reluctance to let Olivia pay for anything. She'd offered to buy him a new laptop when his old one died, and he'd refused so firmly that they didn't speak for 2 days. They fought about Olivia's habit of checking her phone during conversations, which she swore she was working on and which Ryan swore she wasn't. They fought about whether to tell Sophie explicitly that they were in a relationship or whether Sophie had already figured it out on her own. She drew a picture of us at school, Ryan said one evening, holding up a piece of construction paper. Her, me, and you. She titled it, My People. My people? Her words, I think she knows. Should we talk to her about it? I think she already talked to us, with crayons. Through it all, something was being built. Not smoothly, not easily, but with the kind of stubborn persistence that characterized both of them. Olivia learned to silence her phone during dinner. Ryan learned to accept that canceled plans weren't personal rejections. Sophie learned that Olivia was a permanent fixture, not a guest, and she stopped asking, "Is she coming?" and started asking, "When is she coming?" which was a small linguistic shift that meant everything. One evening in late November, Olivia arrived at the apartment looking drained in a way that went beyond tired. She sat down at the kitchen table and put her head in her hands. "What happened?" Ryan asked, setting down the dish towel he'd been holding. "The board. They voted today on the product direction. Accessibility platform stays. I won." "That's good news." "It is. It's great news. It's the thing I've been fighting for all year." "Then why do you look like someone ran over your dog?" She lifted her head. Because winning means delivering, and delivering means the next 18 months are going to be brutal. We're talking global rollout, regulatory compliance in 14 countries, hiring 40 new engineers, raising another round of funding. She paused. It's everything I wanted, and it terrifies me. Ryan sat down across from her. Are you telling me this because you need to vent, or because you're warning me? Both. Okay, vent first. We'll deal with the warning part after. She talked for 30 minutes. About the technical challenges, the hiring pipeline, the investor who'd only agreed to vote her way because she'd promised results within 2 fiscal quarters. About the competitor who'd filed the patent claim, which had been dismissed but had rattled her confidence. About Martin, her COO, who was supportive but stretched thin and who'd started making comments about burnout that she knew were aimed at her. Ryan listened. He didn't offer solutions. He'd learned that Olivia didn't want solutions when she was venting. She wanted someone to hear the weight of what she was carrying without trying to take it from her. When she finished, she looked at him. Okay, now the warning. I'm listening. The next year and a half is going to be the hardest stretch of my career. There will be weeks where I barely sleep. There will be trips, conferences, investor meetings, site visits. I'll miss dinners. I'll be distracted when I'm here. I'll be the worst version of myself on bad days. She swallowed. And I need to know if you can handle that. Not because I'm testing you, but because I care about you enough to be honest about what you're signing up for. Ryan leaned back in his chair. He looked at the kitchen around him. The drawings on the walls. The octopus figurine sitting on the windowsill next to the fern that was somehow still alive. The 2 coffee mugs drying on the rack, one his and one that had somehow become Olivia's. Evidence of a life that was being built, piece by piece, out of small moments and imperfect choices. Let me ask you something, he said. Go ahead. When Jenna was sick, there was a stretch, about 4 months, where everything went sideways. She was in and out of the hospital. Sophie was 3 and didn't understand why Mommy kept leaving. I was barely sleeping, barely eating, barely functioning. My mother-in-law came up from Portland to help, and one night she sat me down and asked me the same question you're asking me right now. She said, "Can you handle this?" And I told her the truth. What was the truth? I said, no, I can't handle this, but I'm going to do it anyway, because that's what you do when something matters. You don't wait until you're ready. You don't wait until it's easy. You just show up, even when it's ugly, even when you're tired, even when you don't know what you're doing. You show up. Olivia's eyes glistened. She pressed her lips together hard. So yeah, Ryan said, I can handle it. Not because I'm strong or patient or any of the things you think I am, but because I've already survived worse, and I'm still here, and because you're worth showing up for. She reached across the table and took his hand. Her grip was tight, almost desperate, and he held on. I don't deserve you, she whispered. That's not how this works. How does it work? We just keep choosing each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. She nodded slowly. Then she let out a long breath, the kind that carries months of tension with it. And when she looked at him again, something had settled in her eyes. Not certainty. Neither of them dealt in certainties, but resolve. The quiet, stubborn determination of a woman who had decided that this imperfect, complicated, difficult thing was hers, and she was not going to let it go. Okay, she said. Okay. But for the record, I think you should let me buy you a laptop. Absolutely not. It's a business expense. You do work for my company. One time. I fixed your server one time. And you were brilliant. Consider it a loyalty bonus. You're impossible. I'm resourceful. There's a difference. From down the hall, a small voice called out, Are you guys fighting again? They both turned toward Sophie's room. The door was cracked open and a single eye was visible in the gap, along with one arm clutching Gerald the elephant. We're not fighting, Bug, Ryan called back. We're negotiating. What's negotiating? It's when two people disagree but nobody yells. Sophie considered this. That's weird. The door closed. Olivia covered her mouth with her hand, shoulders shaking with silent laughter. Ryan dropped his head onto the table and laughed into his arms. And for a moment, the apartment on Rainier Avenue, small, cluttered, imperfect, held exactly as much happiness as it could carry. Orchestrated final narrative arc, resolving all storylines comprehensively. Orchestrated final narrative arc, resolving all storylines comprehensively. Winter came to Seattle the way it always did. Not with a dramatic snowfall or a single defining storm, but with a slow, gray settling, the kind of cold that didn't announce itself so much as move in and refuse to leave. The days shortened, the rain turned sharper, and the apartment on Rainier Avenue got darker earlier, which meant Ryan started leaving the kitchen light on at 4 in the afternoon so Sophie wouldn't come home from school to a dim hallway. It was mid-December when Olivia's product launched. Ryan knew the launch was coming because he'd watched her prepare for it the way a person prepares for a war they've chosen. Late nights became all-nighters. Texts came at 2 and 3 in the morning, not romantic messages, just fragments of thought. If the voice module doesn't pass compliance testing, I'm going to lose my mind. And Martin says the server load projections are fine, but Martin also thought Portugal was a good idea. Ryan responded to each one, even at 2 in the morning, even when his alarm was set for 6, because he'd told her he'd show up, and this was what showing up looked like at 3 a.m. The launch happened on a Tuesday. Ryan didn't hear from Olivia until 9 that night, when she called him from her car in the parking garage below her office building. "We did it," she said. Her voice sounded like it had been dragged over gravel. "It's live. 14 countries, full regulatory clearance. The voice navigation module is working." "How does it feel?" "Like I want to sleep for a week and cry and eat an entire pizza." "I can arrange 2 of those 3. "Which 2? "The pizza and the sleeping. Crying's on you." She laughed, hoarse, exhausted, real. "Can I come over?" Sophie's already asleep, but yeah, come over. She arrived looking like a woman who had pushed herself past every limit she had and was now running on nothing but stubbornness and caffeine. Her hair was in a bun that had given up halfway through the day. Her blazer was wrinkled. She had a smear of something, possibly ink, possibly lunch, on her sleeve. Ryan opened the door and handed her a slice of pizza on a plate. "You actually ordered pizza. You said you wanted pizza." "I thought that was hypothetical." "Nothing about pizza is hypothetical." She ate 3 slices standing at the kitchen counter, too tired to sit down. Ryan leaned against the opposite counter and watched her, and he felt a mix of pride and worry that he couldn't quite untangle. She'd done something remarkable, built a product that would genuinely help people, fought for it when others tried to take it away, and delivered it against odds that would have broken most people. But the cost was written all over her, the dark circles, the weight she'd lost, the way her hands shook slightly when she set down the pizza. "Olivia." "When was the last time you slept more than 4 hours?" She thought about it. The fact that she had to think about it was its own answer. "Thursday. Maybe Wednesday. The days are blurring. That's a week. I'll sleep this weekend." "You'll sleep tonight, right now." "I should go home." "No, you're staying here. Couch or bed, your pick. But you're not driving anywhere." She looked at him, and something in her resistance crumbled. Not dramatically, just a small collapse, a giving way. "Bed," she said quietly. "I'll take the couch." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. Go." She went, and Ryan cleaned up the pizza box and turned off the kitchen light and lay down on the couch, and this time the blanket was still too short and the pillow still smelled like Sophie's shampoo, and he didn't mind at all. In the morning, Sophie found Olivia before Ryan did. He woke to the sound of his daughter's voice, not alarmed but curious, drifting down the hallway. "Why are you in Daddy's bed?" "Because I was very tired, and your daddy let me sleep here." "Where did Daddy sleep?" "On the couch." A pause. Then, with the devastating logic of a 6-year-old, "That's silly. The couch is too small for Daddy. He's a whole grown-up." Ryan appeared in the doorway. Sophie was perched on the edge of the bed, still in her pajamas, with Gerald the elephant under one arm. Olivia was sitting up against the headboard, looking more rested than she had in weeks, but still carrying the deep fatigue that doesn't lift in one night. "Morning, Bug," Ryan said. "Daddy, why didn't you just sleep in the bed too? It's big enough." "Because that's not," Ryan started. "We're not," Olivia started. They looked at each other and simultaneously stopped talking. Sophie studied them both with the patient expression of someone dealing with 2 people who were clearly being ridiculous. You're weird, she concluded, and slid off the bed to go find breakfast. That interaction, small, domestic, unremarkable, turned out to be one of those moments that mattered more than either of them realized at the time. Because what Sophie had said, without knowing she was saying it, was that Olivia's presence in their home had become normal. Not an event, not a visit, just part of the landscape of their life. And the thing about normal was that it changed everything. Christmas arrived, and with it came the question of where to spend it. Ryan's mother-in-law, Linda, had been hosting Christmas at her house in Portland since Jenna died. It was tradition, or rather, it was grief wearing the costume of tradition, a way for Linda to keep her daughter's memory alive through the rituals they'd shared. Ryan had gone every year, and every year it was both comforting and quietly devastating, the empty chair at the table that everyone worked around and nobody mentioned. This year, for the first time, Ryan asked if he could bring someone. The phone call to Linda was one of the hardest conversations he'd had in years. Not because Linda was unkind, she wasn't. She was a retired school teacher with strong opinions and a gentle heart, and she loved Ryan the way she loved her own children, completely, protectively, and with the assumption that she knew what was best for him. "You're seeing someone," Linda said. Not a question. "I am. Her name is Olivia." "How long?" "A few months, but it's serious." The silence on Linda's end was dense with things unsaid. Ryan could hear her breathing, measured and deliberate, the way she breathed when she was processing something that hurt. "Is she good to Sophie?" Linda asked finally. "She's wonderful with Sophie." "And to you?" "She's good to me, Linda. She's really good to me." Another silence. Then, "Bring her." "But Ryan, I'm going to ask her questions. You know that." "I'd expect nothing less." "And I might cry." "I know. Not because I'm unhappy, because my daughter is gone and another woman is sitting at her table, and that's just something I need to feel." "I understand." "Okay." A long breath. "Okay. Tell me about her." Ryan talked for 20 minutes. About the server crash and the bookstore and the science center, about the wedding and Victor Crane and what Ryan had said at that table. About the arguments and the cancellations and the slow, stubborn work of building something real out of two very different lives. By the end, Linda was crying, and so was he, and neither of them pretended they weren't. "She sounds formidable," Linda said. "She is." Jenna would have liked her. The words hit Ryan in the chest like a fist, not because they were painful, but because they were probably true, and the truth of it was almost too much to hold. "Yeah," he said. "I think she would have." The drive to Portland on Christmas Eve was 3 hours of Sophie singing along to holiday songs on the radio, Olivia navigating from the passenger seat with a focus that suggested she was treating the GPS like a board meeting, and Ryan trying to explain to both of them that the car made a funny noise above 60 miles an hour, and it was fine. It had been doing it for months. It was probably just the transmission. "Probably the transmission?" Olivia repeated. "That's what you're going with? Probably?" "It's been doing it since August. If it was going to kill us, it would have done it by now. That's not how cars work. That's exactly how my car works. We have an understanding. An understanding with your transmission. It doesn't judge me, and I don't replace it. Mutual respect." Olivia turned around to Sophie. "Your father is insane." Sophie nodded sagely. "He also won't throw away the toaster, even though it only works on one side." "Sophie, we don't betray family secrets. It's not a secret. The toast is always burnt." They arrived at Linda's house at 4 in the afternoon. It was a modest 2-story in a residential neighborhood, the kind of house that had been lived in properly, gardens that were tended but not manicured, a porch with a chair that had seen 1,000 cups of morning coffee, a front door with a wreath that was slightly crooked. Linda opened the door before they'd reached the steps. She was a small woman with silver hair and Jenna's eyes, or rather, Jenna had had Linda's eyes, the same pale blue, the same directness. She hugged Ryan first, long and tight, and then dropped to her knees to embrace Sophie, who clung to her grandmother with the specific fierceness of a child who understood, in whatever way children understand these things, that this woman was a bridge to someone she couldn't reach anymore. Then Linda stood and looked at Olivia. The two women studied each other for a moment, that felt much longer than it was. Linda's face was composed, but her eyes were bright, and Ryan could see the war happening behind them. The desire to welcome versus the grief of what welcoming meant. Olivia didn't fill the silence. She didn't rush to introduce herself or offer a polished greeting. She just stood there, hands at her sides, and let Linda look at her. It was, Ryan thought, one of the bravest things he'd ever seen her do. Braver than the board meetings, braver than the wedding. Because this was the one person whose opinion actually mattered, and Olivia wasn't trying to control it. She was just being present. "You must be Olivia," Linda said. "I am. Thank you for having me." "Ryan tells me you run a technology company." "I do." "And that you're stubborn." Olivia glanced at Ryan, who suddenly found the porch railing very interesting. "That's probably accurate," she said. Linda nodded slowly. Then she reached out and took Olivia's hand. Not a handshake, but a holding, the way you hold someone's hand when you're deciding whether to trust them. "Come inside. I made too much food, and Sophie needs to open her presents before she explodes." Dinner was pot roast and mashed potatoes and green beans from Linda's garden, frozen in the fall and thawed for this occasion. The table was set for 4, and there was no empty chair this year, and Ryan noticed because he always noticed, and the absence of the absence was its own kind of presence. Linda asked Olivia questions throughout the meal, just as she'd promised. Not hostile ones, measured, careful, the questions of a woman who loved her granddaughter and her son-in-law and needed to know that this new person understood the gravity of what she was entering. "How do you handle pressure?" Linda asked, passing the green beans. "Badly sometimes," Olivia said. "I work too much. I cancel plans. I forget to eat. I'm trying to get better at all of it." "Are you patient?" "Not naturally, but I'm learning." "Sophie lost her mother. You understand what that means?" "I understand that I will never replace her mother. I'm not trying to. I just want to be someone who loves Sophie and who Sophie can count on. I know I haven't earned that yet, but I'd like the chance to." Linda set down her fork. She looked at Olivia with an expression that Ryan had seen only a few times before. The expression of a woman who had suffered a loss so profound that it had rearranged her understanding of the world, and who was now deciding whether to let the world rearrange again. "My daughter was not perfect," Linda said quietly. "People talk about the dead like they were saints, but Jenna wasn't a saint. She was messy and loud, and she argued with everyone about everything, and she left dishes in the sink for days. But she loved her family with everything she had, and that's the only thing that mattered." "I know," Olivia said. "Do you love this family?" The table went still. Sophie was watching, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth, with the attentiveness of a child who understood that something important was happening even if she couldn't name it. Olivia looked at Ryan, then at Sophie, then back at Linda. "Yes," she said. "I do." Linda held her gaze for a long moment. Then she picked up her fork. "Good. Have more potatoes. You're too thin." Ryan exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. After dinner, while Sophie was in the living room tearing into presents with the systematic destruction of a small hurricane, Ryan found Linda in the kitchen, washing dishes at the sink. He picked up a towel and started drying. They worked in silence for a while, the way they always had. Linda washed, Ryan dried, and mussing. It was a rhythm from hundreds of visits, from holidays and weekends, and the terrible stretch after Jenna's death when Ryan would drive to Portland just to sit in the house where his wife had grown up, surrounded by the evidence of who she'd been before she was his. "She's not what I expected," Linda said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone smoother, maybe. More polished. She's rougher than I thought. She's honest." "I noticed." Linda handed him a pot. "Ryan, can I say something without you getting defensive?" "You can try." "I was scared to meet her. Not because I thought she'd be bad for you, but because I was afraid she'd make me forget Jenna. Like if I liked this woman, it would mean Jenna was being replaced, that my daughter was just a chapter that ended." Ryan set down the pot. "Linda, let me finish. I sat at that table tonight, and I watched Olivia with Sophie, and I watched Sophie with Olivia, and I realized that I was wrong. Nobody's replacing anyone. Jenna is in every drawing on that apartment wall. She's in the way Sophie laughs, the way she argues, the way she crosses her arms when she doesn't want to eat her cereal. Jenna's everywhere, and Olivia isn't trying to take that space. She's building something new right next to it. Ryan leaned against the counter. His eyes were stinging, and he didn't try to hide it. "I loved your daughter," he said. "I'll love her for the rest of my life." "I know you will. That's why I trust you with this." She reached out and squeezed his arm, and they stood in the kitchen, not talking, while the sound of Sophie's laughter drifted in from the living room, mixed with Olivia's voice saying, "No, the wrapping paper goes in the bag, not on the floor." "Sophie, that's the cat. Does your grandmother have a cat?" "She doesn't have a cat," Ryan called. "Then something just ran behind the couch. That's Mrs. Callahan's cat. He comes through the window. Linda, your window's open again." "I know. He likes the pot roast." They spent the night in Portland. Sophie slept in the guest room with Linda, which was their tradition, and Ryan and Olivia took the pull-out sofa in the den, which was marginally better than Ryan's couch at home and twice as noisy. Every shift in position produced a symphony of metal springs. In the dark, lying side by side on a mattress that had probably been purchased during the Clinton administration, Olivia spoke quietly. "Your mother-in-law is incredible. She's terrifying." "She's incredible and terrifying. That's not a contradiction." "She likes you." "How can you tell?" "She told you to eat more potatoes. That's Linda's love language." Olivia was quiet for a moment. "Ryan?" "Yeah?" "She asked me if I loved this family, and I said yes." "I heard." "I meant it. I want you to know that I meant it. It wasn't a performance for her benefit or something I said to get through dinner. I love Sophie. I love—" She stopped. "I love being here, in this life, in your messy, chaotic, too small apartment with the broken toaster and the fern that somehow hasn't died. I love that Sophie draws pictures of me. I love that you watch Titanic alone at midnight. I love all of it." "You didn't finish that sentence." "Which one?" "The one where you stopped in the middle." Silence. The springs creaked as she shifted. "I love you," she said. "I'm saying it badly and on a terrible mattress, and I should probably wait for a better moment, but I don't care. I love you." Ryan turned toward her in the dark. He couldn't see her face clearly, just the outline of it, the faint light from the hallway catching her eyes. "I love you too," he said. "And for the record, there's no better moment than this one." "On a pull-out sofa in your mother-in-law's den?" "On a pull-out sofa in my mother-in-law's den, with a stolen cat somewhere in the house." "Yeah." She laughed, soft, careful, trying not to wake the house. And he pulled her close, and the springs protested loudly, and they both froze. "If Linda hears this mattress, she's going to think," Olivia whispered. "Don't finish that sentence. I'm just saying, I know what you're saying. Please stop saying it." They lay still, listening. No footsteps. No doors opening. Just the distant sound of rain on the roof and the heater clicking through its cycle. "Merry Christmas," Olivia whispered. "Merry Christmas." The months that followed were not a montage. There was no accelerated sequence of seasons changing and happy moments accumulating, set to uplifting music. There was just life. Daily, persistent, mundane, occasionally beautiful, frequently difficult, always real. Olivia's company grew. The accessibility platform exceeded projections in its first quarter, and the board members who'd tried to kill it were suddenly its biggest champions, which Olivia handled with the gracious professionalism of someone who absolutely kept a mental list of people who doubted her and would never, ever forget. She hired 20 new engineers, expanded into 3 new markets, and was profiled in a technology magazine under the headline, "The CEO Who Bet on People." She hated the headline. "It makes me sound like a motivational poster," she told Ryan. But she framed the article anyway. Ryan's business changed too, though not as dramatically. The exposure from the Kessler wedding, ironically, had brought him new clients. People in Olivia's circle, executives, startup founders, venture capitalists, started calling him when their systems went down. Not because he was Olivia's partner, but because word had gotten around that he was fast, reliable, and didn't overcharge. He hired his first employee in February, a 23-year-old named Marcus who dropped out of the same community college program Ryan had, and who reminded Ryan so much of his younger self that it made him uncomfortable. Sophie turned 7 in March. They threw the party at the apartment, which was too small for the 12 kids who showed up, but exactly the right size for the chaos that ensued. Olivia helped Ryan set up and spent most of the party in the kitchen, assembling sandwiches and refilling juice cups with the focused determination of someone who was treating a children's birthday party like a product launch. "You're taking this very seriously," Ryan observed, watching her arrange animal crackers in a precise circle on a platter. "Every project deserves full commitment. It's crackers. It's Sophie's crackers. They should be symmetrical." At one point during the party, Sophie pulled Ryan aside with the conspiratorial air of a spy delivering classified intelligence. "Daddy," she whispered, "Emily's mom asked me if Olivia is my stepmom." Ryan's stomach dropped. "What did you say?" "I said, she's Olivia, and she's part of my people." "That's a good answer, Bug." "I know, but Daddy? Yeah? What is she? Like, actually?" Ryan looked across the room at Olivia, who was now engaged in a heated negotiation with a 7-year-old boy about whether dinosaurs could beat robots in a fight. "She's someone who loves us," Ryan said, "and someone we love, that's what she is." Sophie considered this with the gravity of a philosopher evaluating a theorem. "Okay," she said, "but if she ever wants to be my stepmom, she has to ask me first." "Noted. And she has to bring more octopuses." "I'll pass that along." Spring came, and with it the kind of Seattle day that makes residents forget about the 9 months of gray that precede it. Blue sky, clean air, the mountains visible in the distance like a postcard someone had forgotten to send. Ryan took Sophie and Olivia to Cary Park on a Saturday afternoon, the viewpoint he'd once told Olivia she needed to see at sunset. They sat on the grass, Sophie between them, watching the city spread out below. The Space Needle, the waterfront, the ferries crossing the sound like slow-moving thoughts. Mount Rainier floating above it all. Improbable and massive, the kind of thing you could see every day and still not quite believe. Sophie was drawing. She'd brought her colored pencils, the ones Olivia had given her, and was working on something with the intense concentration she reserved for art. "What are you making, Bug?" Ryan asked. "It's a surprise. Don't look." They sat in the sun and waited. Olivia leaned her head against Ryan's shoulder, and he put his arm around her, and they watched the light move across the water. It was the kind of moment that didn't feel like a moment while it was happening. Just a Saturday, just a park, just the three of them doing nothing in particular. "Done," Sophie announced. She held up the drawing. It was a picture of 3 people standing in front of a house. Not the apartment on Rainier Avenue, but a house with a real yard and a tree and a door that was painted red. Above the people in Sophie's careful, uneven handwriting, she had written, "My family." Ryan stared at the drawing. Then he looked at Olivia, who was staring at it too. The 3 figures were clearly identifiable. The tall one was Ryan, drawn with disproportionately large hands because, as Sophie had once explained, "You fix things with your hands, Daddy, so they should be big." The medium one was Olivia, wearing a tiny blazer and holding what appeared to be a phone, because Sophie had never known Olivia without a phone in her hand. And the small one was Sophie herself, standing between them, holding both their hands. "That's us," Sophie said, as if it were obvious, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Olivia's face did something that Ryan had never seen before. It crumpled. Not with sadness, with the overwhelming, unbearable weight of being loved by a child. Her eyes filled and spilled over, and she didn't wipe the tears away. She just looked at the drawing and at Sophie and at the family that this 7-year-old had decided existed, not because anyone had told her it did, but because she felt it. "Can I keep this?" Olivia asked, her voice barely steady. "It's for you," Sophie said, "for your office, because you said your office doesn't have personality." Olivia pulled Sophie into a hug so sudden and fierce that Sophie yelped, then giggled, then hugged her back. Ryan watched them. 2 people he loved, holding each other on a hill overlooking the city where everything had started. A server crash. A bookstore. A question at a wedding that was meant to diminish them and instead became the moment they declared themselves. He thought about what it meant to build a family. Not the first time, the first time with Jenna had felt like the most natural thing in the world. They were young and confident and certain that love was enough because they hadn't yet learned that it wasn't. The second time was different. The second time you built with your eyes open. You saw every crack, every fault line, every place where the foundation might give way. And you built anyway. Not because you were naive, but because you'd learned that the alternative, building nothing, risking nothing, keeping your heart in a locked room, was its own kind of death. Olivia pulled back from Sophie and looked at Ryan over their daughter's head. Not his biological daughter, not his late wife's daughter, their daughter, because family wasn't determined by biology or law or convention. It was determined by who showed up, who kept showing up, who chose to love a child that wasn't theirs, and a man who came with grief and a broken toaster, and an apartment that was too small, and a car that made funny noises above 60. "What are you thinking?" Olivia asked him. "I'm thinking about how wrong Victor Crane was." "Victor Crane from the wedding?" "He said we were unexpected, like that was a problem. Like being unexpected meant we didn't make sense." "We don't make sense." "No, but we make a family." Olivia smiled. The real smile. The one he'd seen for the first time in her glass office on the 14th floor. The one that changed her entire face. "Yeah," she said. "We do." Sophie tugged on Ryan's sleeve. "Daddy?" "Yeah, Bug? Can we get ice cream? It's barely April." "So?" "So it's not exactly ice cream weather." "Olivia, is it ice cream weather?" Olivia pretended to consider the question seriously. "I think the data supports ice cream." "The data," Ryan repeated. "I'm a CEO. I make data-driven decisions." "You're ganging up on me." "We're collaborating," Olivia corrected. "There's a difference." Sophie was already on her feet, pulling Ryan's arm with both hands. "Come on, Daddy. The data says yes." They walked down the hill together, the three of them, Sophie between Ryan and Olivia, holding both their hands. The city spread below them, alive and noisy and indifferent, the way cities are, full of people carrying their own complicated lives through ordinary days, making choices that felt small in the moment and enormous in retrospect. At the bottom of the hill, there was an ice cream shop that Ryan had been going to since before Sophie was born. It was small and always slightly too warm inside, and the woman behind the counter knew Sophie by name. "2 scoops?" the woman asked Sophie. "3, Sophie said. "2, Ryan said. 2.5, Olivia offered. "That's not a thing," Ryan said. "I'll make it a thing," the woman behind the counter said, already scooping. They sat outside on a bench that was too small for 3 people, eating ice cream that was too cold for April. And Sophie got chocolate on her overalls and Olivia got vanilla on her sleeve, and Ryan sat between them, holding a cone that was melting faster than he could eat it. And he was happy. Not the complicated, qualified, asterisked happiness that he'd gotten used to, the kind where you're happy but also tired. Happy but also worried. Happy but also waiting for the other shoe to drop. Just happy. Unmodified. The kind of happy that exists for exactly as long as it exists and doesn't apologize for itself. It wouldn't last forever. He knew that. Olivia would have bad weeks. Sophie would have bad days. The business would struggle. The car would eventually break down for real. There would be fights about phones and schedules and burnt toast and all the small grinding frictions of a life shared between imperfect people. But that was the whole point, wasn't it? The whole point of everything he'd learned in the last 3 years. From grief, from loneliness, from standing in front of a room full of strangers and telling the truth about who he was. The point was never that love made things easy. The point was that love made things worth it. Worth the mess, worth the risk, worth the terrible pull-out sofa and the too small apartment and the questions from people who didn't understand. Sophie finished her ice cream and wiped her hands on Ryan's jacket, which she'd been using as a napkin for approximately 5 years. "Daddy?" "Yeah, Bug? I want to go home." "Okay, let's go home." The 3 of them walked back to the car. The 10-year-old Honda Civic with the check engine light and the transmission that made funny noises, and the back seat that still had cracker crumbs from Sophie's last snack and a spare phone charger that Olivia had left there 3 weeks ago and never retrieved because it was always there when she needed it, which meant she was always there, which meant this was her car too, in the way that everything in Ryan's life had quietly, gradually, irreversibly become theirs. He drove them home through the late afternoon traffic, Sophie singing in the back seat, Olivia beside him with her hand resting on his arm, the drawing of my family tucked carefully in her bag. And when they reached the apartment on Rainier Avenue, small, cluttered, imperfect, full of drawings and stuffed animals, and a fern that had no business being alive and yet stubbornly was. Ryan unlocked the door, and Sophie ran inside, and Olivia stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at the door frame as if she were seeing it for the first time. "What?" Ryan asked. "Nothing. I just like this door." "It's a door. It's the door to the place where you and Sophie are. That makes it a very good door." He pulled her inside and the door closed behind them, and the apartment was warm, and Sophie was already in her room talking to Gerald the elephant about the ice cream, and the kitchen light was on because Ryan had left it on that morning, and everything was exactly as imperfect and complicated and real as it had always been. Nothing about their life was what anyone would call conventional. A single father who fixed computers, and a CEO who ran a company worth millions, and a 7-year-old who communicated in drawings and animal facts. The questions from strangers never fully stopped. People still looked at them and did the math, still tried to figure out the equation, still searched for the logic in two people from entirely different worlds choosing each other. But the questions had stopped mattering. Not because Ryan and Olivia had stopped hearing them, but because they'd found the only answer that counted. Not an argument, not a defense, not a speech at a candlelit table, though that hadn't hurt. Just a life. Built day by day, mistake by mistake. Canceled dinner by rescheduled dinner. Burnt toast by decent spaghetti. Argument by apology, by laughter, by silence, by love. The kind of family that nobody plans for and nobody expects. The kind of family that you build when you're brave enough to try again.